good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to the Shure Workflow Series webinar. This week, we are covering ShowLink. My name is Jen. I'm here along with the rest of the Pro Market Dev team, including Ben Escobedo and Jason Waffle. And we have three awesome panelists today that we're super excited to be discussing their workflow with. So they are Martin, aka Tike Santos from the Garth Brooks tour, Terence McCormack Maitland, who's a sound utility for West Side Story, Irishman, and Jimmy Kwon, who is the audio lead and front of house mixer for the Criss Angel Vegas Residency and tour. I'm going to give you a little brief intro of who they are and a little bit about what they do. And let's start with Tike.
Well, principally, I am responsible for the monitor side of things for Garth, and that's sort of been the case for the last 6 years. And part of that, we're a small team, so part of that goes to RF as well, which actually is something I have a lot of passion for.
And Tike, you do all the frequency coordination and everything for the tour as well? Or you're responsible for a great deal of the RF, I believe.
Do.
Yeah?
Yeah, besides anything that you would coordinate as fixed carrier stuff, also just mitigating problems associated with Wi-Fi traffic, things in the 33 centimeter band, anything that might be spread spectrum. We still want to manage that spectrum to be sure that everyone's working.
Awesome. Terence.
Hi. Sound utility and production, movie and TV sound. And sound utility is like sort of the jack of all trades. I'm a boom operator, among other things, and then I also do the spectrum management and like metadata and all sorts of other stuff. But generally, whatever needs to get done on set. And I've been doing it for about 10 years. Just started using Shure last summer, though.
All right, Jimmy.
Hello. So I've been with Criss for 5 years, doing touring for him first, and then since last year, he moved from Luxor to Planet Hollywood on his production show. So was involved on install on all the audio gears, and then now I'm at the front house and still does tour with him time to time out on the road.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us. We're really excited for the discussion. For those of you who are tuning in, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction of what ShowLink is. And just in case you've never heard that term before, what the heck are we talking about? So ShowLink is Shure's protocol for real-time transmitter remote control. So it allows you to have access for your portables, for your axient digital transmitters, and it links up to the receiver very seamlessly. These are the things that you kind of need for this. So if you look in the picture, there's the AD610 access point. What that is a device specifically used to communicate to the transmitters. And then the transmitters, there are specific transmitters with certain systems. Axient Analog has some. Axient Digital, the ADX line of transmitters, which is what we have pictured here, those have ShowLink functionality, which means combined with the Axient Digital system and the AD610, you can message your transmitters in real time. And that's any functionality that you would normally have if you had your hands on your transmitters. You can change the frequency, you can change the gain, you can bump the power, you can RF mute them. So you no longer have to be that person who you don't have that time suck of having to go grab it on stage or anything. So it tries to keep your workflow very seamless and very quick. So with the AD610, you can control up to 24 different transmitters. It has the function, if you have more than 24 devices, you add additional access points. And you can also add additional AD610 access points to extend the range. So you can put it by the green room, or you could put it you know, down the hallway, whatever makes sense. And that way you always get the metrics back from what your transmitters are doing. So the one feature that I do want to call out, because it's a specialty of the Axient digital ecosystem, and I know some folks are using it, is this interference detection and avoidance. And you'll notice that a lot of the Shure products have this interference detection, and then that's the receiver being able to identify that it's getting interference from an RF standpoint. So if you combine having that remote control and that connection to your transmitters, if you add the spectrum manager, which is that AXT600, you can actually have an automatic frequency change situation where the receiver detects interference, the receiver goes to the spectrum manager and says, like, look, you've been monitoring the frequencies for me, I need a new frequency, and then the receiver and the transmitter will change together very quickly. So immediately you're fixing any of your RF interference problems as well. So that's just a real quick overview. Do feel free to ask questions. If you haven't noticed already, there's a little questions area in the GoToWebinar. Throw questions in there as you have them. We'll be fielding them as we go, and feel free to ask questions of our panelists as well. All right, so with that aside, so we know kind of what we're talking about, let's talk about what gear you guys are using. So let's start with Tike. Here's a picture of the rack that you sent me. So,
so on the left there are actually 18 channels of PSM 1000. Nothing there, of course, is ShowLink enabled, but everything on the right side, of course, has ShowLink access. It's 14 channels of Axient analog and 16 of Axient digital. And there's a possibility we'll add an additional 12 channels of Axient digital because the client wants to achieve another particular thing, which may require more wireless.
All right. All right.
I'll say that's a charger rack on the other side.
So this is your chart. Oh, okay. On the far right side, that's the charger rack. You're using the SBRCs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the
okay.
one side of the field. The other side of the field has a different rack that's a little bit smaller, another charger rack.
Gotcha. Where do you have, so for the stuff that is ShowLink enabled, where do you have your access points set up?
One is, you can actually barely see it in that picture. On the right side of the large rack, there's a 610 there. And that really functions only to work in the area below the set. The set acts much like a Faraday cage. And so there's kind of poor performance beneath the set. There would be poor ShowLink access under the set if we wanted to, during setup, of course, have anything that's ShowLink enabled refreak itself, if you will. So there's one down below, and then sometimes one, or always one, and sometimes two upstairs on the stage, because effectively the metal surfaces of the stage really prevent much transmission between the two areas.
Do you have your access point on all the time? Like, how are you using ShowLink for this rig?
We do. It is our choice to typically the primary concern, and during the show, I'm only running one timeline, but it is our choice to not set it to automatic, but rather to prompt to make a change. And that isn't because I don't trust the system, but rather because if something happens to be stepping on one of our microphone or instrument systems, it is possible that whoever came in, if there was an ENG team who was not maybe didn't submit their frequencies in advance or something like that, they may well have something on the air that might interfere with something that I don't have ShowLink control over, for example, our ear systems. So I like that prompt because it's a warning, oh, someone's come in, I can mitigate the problem with this particular channel, but it's also a warning that, oh, we need to see if there's something else going on where I don't have ShowLink control over it.
Okay. So let's kind of roll through. Are there any other things you want to add about your rig setup?
With respect to ShowLink, I'll say that there's a location up on the stage where there's a lot going on in the 2.4 gigahertz range. Obviously, ShowLink works with Zigbee, and it's the same real estate, though different channel set from, say, Wi-Fi. But there are from two other departments, there's a lot of traffic in that same range. So happily, the way that that Zigbee mitigates traffic problems, the CSMA CA component of it, it's very effective, but we still try to do all the prudent things like keep space between my ShowLink and a Wi-Fi router. Really the same practices that you would do with UHF types of carriers, keep potential offenders away from my receive antennas if there's a transmitter that might be a problem. I think good application of a 610 is just following those basic rules. Frequency range is a little bit different for that component of it, but the results are the same.
Cool. All right, let's give Tike a break. Terence,
Hi.
Hi. So you sent me this picture of your rig. Can you tell everybody what's going on here?
Yeah, so we go to different locations every day, or most days, and so we have to be very portable. And so it's all in this cart, and we have 6 84 Qs, and then we have the AXT600 and the P10T set up on there. And I don't think you can really see where our 610 is, but it's sort of right behind those monitors on the right side. And we have one of them is the directional antenna, and then the other one is the Omni. And we just built it in, I guess about a year ago.
Okay, great. So it looks like, so you have a helical for your P10T, it looks like, and then
Yes.
a couple directional
PDA,
paddles for your mic.
Those are WYSICOM filtering paddles.
Okay, gotcha. How are you using? Do you have the AXT600? Are you having it run in an automatic mode, or are you doing more of a prompt the way Tike is?
We haven't. We've done both, and we had it in automatic mode. There was a TV channel migration in New York City last summer, and we didn't notice it because we had the AXT running on automatic, where every other production in the city, like all the sound mixers, were pulling their hair out because nobody knew what frequencies were available, and it happened like in the middle of the day.
Oh, great!
And yeah, and it just like whatever frequencies were being interfered with just moved over, and the dropout is so minimal if it's within ShowLink range that it's not like we didn't even hear it, because it could have been in between a take or something.
Okay, perfect. Did you use ShowLink for your setup as well, or is it mainly just operational once you had your production going?
Well, so since we move around a lot, I scan every day, and I so every day we are assigning new frequencies to things because we'll be if we're close to Broadway, if we're close to the Empire State Building, so every day there's a different set of frequencies out there. Or like we went to Patterson for 2 weeks, Patterson, New Jersey, and so every day we use it to freak our or not. If I scan it, it all looks fine. But yeah, so we always set up with it.
Okay, perfect. And the transmitters you were using were the the micro ones, the ADX1Ms, or both?
So for the boom, so we have four of the ADX1s, and then 24 of the ADX1M. And so on the booms, we had those with ambient power supply to get to 48 volt, and then the micros were on all the talent.
Okay. Cool. And what did you find most handy about running ShowLink for the production? Obviously, some of the interference stuff with the TV migration.
Yeah. So I mean, there's the interference management, but then other stuff like, so we are doing different scenes throughout the day, and costume changes and things, and we never quite know when we're going to wire somebody or when we're not going to put a pack on them instead of just using the boom. But when some of the costumes, like these actresses are like actually sewn into the dresses, and so being able to put the pack on and then mute it, and then they go to their trailer, RF mute for a good number of hours sometimes, waiting for them to come back, but they're wearing the pack. It's RF muted. It's not transmitting, so it's saving a bunch of battery life. And then when they come back, we can turn it back on. And then, then we don't, it makes it easier when you can save the battery life, that we don't have to get access to this person to change batteries on them. So yeah, stuff like that.
Awesome. So we had a question come in actually about your rig, and the question is can you talk about how your antennas are so close together on the cart? Do you still get good diversity performance?
Yeah, we do get good diversity. One thing is that this right now isn't actually how it's usually set up. So the receive antennas are on a telescoping mast. So when we land someplace, we send that up. I think it goes up 15 feet, just so nobody thinks it's right next to the transmit antenna. But we keep it like this because sometimes we have to move in between shots, from one shot to the next. If they're going to see where we are, we have to move. So if we were to have them remoted out, it would add another step. But we do get, I can see it popping in between the two. And so there is, it's using the diversity. It's not as great as it could be if we were further apart. And if there is an issue, it's on a little quick release, and there's like 25 feet of cable on there, and then we'll move it out as needed.
Cool. All right. Sorry, just checking the questions. All right. We're going to pause on you for a minute, and let's talk about Jimmy.
Hello. So the Mind Freak at the Planet Hollywood in Las Vegas used about a 2 ADX1M for body pack for Criss, one for main and one for spare that is on a stage left. And then 3 ADX2 handheld with the KSM8 capsule for bears, whatever Criss wants to use as a handheld. And then we use 2 82 handheld that is not axient compatible, and then bunch PSM, actually 2 PSM 1000 and bunch PSM 900 for a fallback system. So the ShowLink, the antenna, the receiving antenna is one on front of house and actually one on stage right side, and also transmitter for ears, and the fallback system is on the mid stage on a stage right side as well. And then the ShowLink is actually, for me, is the best at the front of house, because on stage there's a lot of illusion because it's a magic show. So there's a lot of illusion. There's a lot of video panels that actually I try to keep it away from. So the the time that I need is when Criss is on stage, and then most this line of sight is at the front house. So from the front house to downstage is about 50 feet, and all the way to the upstage roll-up doors about 100 feet. So that's been the working system at the Planet Hollywood at the moment.
And where is your rack gear? So your rack gear is nowhere near you, right?
Yes, the rack is on completely separate room. That is all the video servers and an audio, and it's a completely separate room with the separate powers. So the access to it during the show is very limited, and also the show runs with just me as a audio, and then I have kind of swing A2 that does other stuff that is not really concentrated on audio. So for me, having a ShowLink system, being at the front house and then not be able to have access to the rack or stage is super helpful. Because also I have a one bass player triggering all the music, and his ears and in his bass pack with the ADX one pack is, having access to it, especially being a bass player, is super super helpful. So a couple instances that I had is that Criss wears the body pack ADX1M pack with his like as Terence was saying, that has a mic suit that he wears underneath that all his costumes. So if something goes wrong, it's really hard to get into it because there's a lot of layers up to that point than any other costume. So, and then the Planet Hollywood is in the middle of Las Vegas, and there might be something else going on in front of the theater with convention rooms. There might be something else going on the Paris, which is just right across the roll-up doors. So sometimes I get a hit, and then changing it between the sets. I put it as a prompt. I don't do automatic, but I have changed the frequency in the middle of the show where he was off stage and doing quick change, and then it worked fine. Bass player forgot to lock the pack, and suddenly there was no bass, so turn it back on, and then I was able to lock it remotely, and then he was happy. So those kind of situation really helps being a one-man operation, and then was able to access and then just as the show continued to goes.
And you're making all of these changes via wireless Workbench, yes?
Yes. And then the wireless Workbench is in the front of house. Also, I use the also on the maintenance days, or if I want to troubleshoot the day after, whatever the trouble was having the day before, having an iPad, that all integrates, and then it's been really helpful. And so.
Okay, I didn't realize you'd set up the channels app for the iPad.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I also have that on my iPad.
Awesome. I hadn't even planned on talking about that. It's great to hear that you both have that set up. For those of you listening in, we have an iOS app. You do have to set up your own Wi-Fi access point to join to, but it gives you metering and metrics for your Shure gear on your iPad. So, Tike, I don't know, have you ever used that one?
I have. I will say that we typically remotely, I often go to just a laptop wirelessly and run a second version of Workbench on it, just because the interface is sometimes more convenient, just having the keyboard and such. But we certainly used the app, and it's nice to have it on your phone and just sort of see what is available.
Yeah, we have a second cart, and I have the iPad on the cart, on the secondary cart, and it's if the main cart is in a room where I can't get access while we're rolling, it's nice to be able to look and see what the battery levels are, and that kind of thing.
Do you have your chargers networked as well? This is for any of you. Just curious.
I do.
Yeah,
So
I definitely do.
yeah, all the SBC series and are networked, and then comes to. I rarely monitor it on a wireless Workbench, but I know it is there. So
Our chargers we have some chargers with us, but most of our charging rack is on the truck. So it's not
Gotcha.
attached
So
to
it
anything.
doesn't go with you on the cart. It stays on the truck, and then you just pull the batteries.
Yeah, and we don't really have to change them that much. Like if we have 12 or 14-hour day, we basically just change them at lunch. And so it's not, we have more than enough batteries most days.
Certainly, we've got 9 frames that are networked, and it's convenient only because, as indicated, there's a rack on the other side of the stage, and sometimes it'll be the case that the backline technician will be in a rush and might put in a battery and maybe not seat it properly, so it won't necessarily be charging. We'll get a battery fault, and I can just tell them over talkback, hey, could you push on that a little bit or reseat it? Nothing else. It's nice just to keep track of sort of in a down moment the battery health, so to see, is everything okay? So saying I can count on maybe one hand the number of battery problems I've actually had in the last 6 years, but it's nice to keep track of it.
Cool. So we have a question about how operating range for ShowLink has been for your applications. So I think, sorry, I can't remember who said they were using a directional antenna. I think it was Terence.
Yeah.
Yep. So you have a directional antenna mounted on the ShowLink. And how is the range performance, compared to your UHF range performance?
I'd say they were pretty comparable. We have the directional on there because the way that we usually try and have the cart set up is that it's pointed, at the action. But we could be going through several rooms, or a brick wall or whatever it is, just whatever the set demands. So we just thought, we had it and we thought it'd be nice to put it on there. And but it's I'd say it was, about in our experience, it's pretty similar to just the regular RF.
same for me. When Criss is on his dressing room, I lose the RF and also the access point, and then as he comes on stage, slowly I see everything gets picked up, and then it locks on, and then he will be fine.
And Jimmy, your access point is at your front of house position.
Yeah, I'm at the front of house.
Right? That's right.
Yeah.
And you just have the one?
Repeat that?
And you just have the one access point?
Yeah, just one access point at the front of house. It follows very similar to we have a Claricom FreeSpeak 2 at 1.9 gigahertz range, and then the wireless router. There's some dark holes in the theater where none of the FreeSpeak can't work, even though there's antennas on the catwalk. There's a couple spots that is just surrounded by metals and underneath, and so those spots are very typical that you won't get any reception unless you have antenna right there. But at the front house, it ranges like a Wi-Fi. It ranges like FreeSpeak, where most of an area that you're seeing on stage will be covered. Even though I actually prefer at the front house than on stage for Criss's show, because there's so much movement on stage with big illusion pieces and video wall coming in and out. So I just having at the front of house has more direct line of sight than on stage.
And Tike, you're doing stadiums mostly.
The last
right?
Year, yeah.
Yeah. How does the Garth set, because I know you have multiple access points that you were talking about using.
Yeah. The layout is in the round, and as such, I would love to, I'm envious of Jimmy Terence. I would love to try one of the LPDA. In our application, it doesn't make sense because our on-stage access point, or points usually end up being in the center of the performance area. So it's advisable to stick with the existing antennas. It sort of is the position that gives us the best line of sight to everything. And under those circumstances, the performance is essentially equal to the UHF performance in terms of coverage area.
And how did you decide on placement for the different access points?
I didn't. That's not entirely true. To be candid, my client doesn't like anything between him and the audience, and so it though you would say, hey, what's a little LPDA antenna? It's nothing. But to him, it really is, because he really wants engagement with those people. He's very hands-on with the audience members, and so to that end, our UHF antennae as well. Everything is actually on the 4 supporting posts around the stage that are sort of inside of the area where he walks principally. So as is often, like in Jimmy's case, part of what's going on is he's trying to look out for in the bigger picture, look out for these large elements that are moving in the show, and he's got to avoid getting in the way. Same is true for us, where maybe we didn't always find the most desirable RF performance location, but we're serving a greater purpose for the production.
Perfect. Out of curiosity, is anybody using the access point in manual mode, or are you letting it do automatic channel selection? And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's fine, because it's mostly designed to work in an automatic mode.
I've looked at it, but I've not really come into that many problems with it.
Okay,
in automatic
perfect.
mode.
Yeah, so just to back that up, so the access point, actually I'm going to pull one out so people can see it. So I don't have the, so these are the omnidirectional antennas. There's 2 of them. It's a full diversity system in the way it works. I only have one hooked up. I have another one down there. This here is also another antenna, and this antenna is the one that is constantly scanning. Wireless-wise, this uses Zigbee. All of our panelists have mentioned that. Those of you who are tuning in and are not familiar with Zigbee, Zigbee lives in the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum, just like Wi-Fi does. However, its channel scheme is slightly different. So there's actually a couple of Zigbee channels that are located offset to what typical Wi-Fi is doing. So the way, by default, your 8610 runs in an automatic mode where it's using the diversity antennas to communicate with your transmitters on a particular Zigbee channel. And the secondary antenna is just scanning to see if that channel, that frequency range that it's using for that communication is working well. So it feels so, and that has more to do with density. So Zigbee is great because it cooperates on top of Wi-Fi and other things. 2.4 is a little different in that, like in UHF, you can't have 2 things on the same frequency, right? You're going to get a dropout. The way Wi-Fi works, it has more to do with the amount of data throughput that you're seeing on the channel. So if you're video streaming, that's a lot of data coming through on that range. Whereas like Zigbee or some of the other protocols are just like a little just more chatty. They're just like, here's a message as we need it. So everything coexists very well. So if it does feel like it isn't happy with the channel density and what's going on, it will actually change and message your transmitters like, hey, we're going to communicate on this other channel, so let's all go over there. Okay. So in some cases, and we especially see that not so much in like theater production, but we definitely see it a lot in like corporate IT when they're using this, is that the IT departments like to control what's happening in the 2.4 for a variety of reasons. So if you're going, so you actually have the ability with this via wireless Workbench to say, I'm specifically using this channel. So Ben, if you have do you have wireless Workbench set up? Can you show where that interface lives?
I sure can. Let me bring it up real quickly. And here it is. So in our main screen here, we have the inventory and a couple different ways to get to it. But you see here down at the bottom is my AD610 access point. So if you want more parameters on that, just right click on properties, and then it brings up the properties of the access point. There are some hidden settings here that aren't quite apparent right off the rip, but it does tell you what the current channel is, what the channel mode is, if you want to do a manual type of coordination of the access point and what channel that should be on. And you can also use a channel mask as well, which will allow you to kind of lock out certain channels if you wish. Additionally, the other hidden settings here are the IP addressing. So if you're curious about how to set either static or DHCP, you can do that right from here because, of course, the access point itself doesn't have a screen on it. So you need to coordinate it right from here. And you can even turn on access control if you want to lock this with a PIN number so that others can't use it. But this is basically what you would be doing here to make sure it stays on a certain channel. For better visibility, I think it's good to show a little bit under the frequency, the ShowLink plot. If you click this button at the top, it'll actually show you what's going on with your ShowLink access point. Much like your regular scan, it'll tell you the active channel that the access point is on and what is happening. Much like a regular scan that you can do, you can actually do a scan with the access point and show you in real time what's happening in your Wi-Fi spectrum. So here you can see that the unit itself automatically negotiated for this open and free channel because it's on automatic. But in my crazy office scenario here, there is some Wi-Fi, not as bad as a lot of other areas, but you can see over like Wi-Fi channels 9, 10, 11, 12, etc. are pretty busy. That's with my Ubiquity access point here. Another kind of like little tip that's really useful is if you're curious, these are the Wi-Fi channels that operate. So you may be like in a scenario either on a tour or maybe in an office scenario or business where the IT department says, hey, stay off my channel 11 or channel 5 or whatever. And you can actually use that to block and set the channel mask so that these won't hop to those specific channels if you're requested to by IT. And the last thing I'd like to share is that you can simply click on the Wi-Fi channels here with your right mouse button, and you can say show ShowLink channels instead of Wi-Fi, and this will give you more of a granular approach of like showing you what the Zigbee channels actually look like versus the Wi-Fi. So you notice instead of like 1 to 13, we see channels like 11 through 26, which are more applicable to what's happening with the Zigbee. For 99% of cases, though, I'd say let's leave it on automatic, and it does its magic and kind of self-navigates the spectrum. As you can see here, there's quite a bit of Wi-Fi going on, but it's choosing a nice, free, clean channel. And if this ever got polluted, it automatically negotiates and finds you the next free, clean channel. So.
Yep, so most likely it'll be on channel 11 and channel 26 because it's outside of Wi-Fi, and that's free and clear communication. So. But yeah, so by default, it's in automatic mode. We definitely recommend leaving it there, but you can absolutely go and coordinate this if you need to as well.
Jen, while we got this up, just quickly, a question came in. How do you change the power output on the access point? So let's go back into the other menu while we got it up here, and we can take a look at that. So again, you bring up the properties on the inventory page by right-clicking, and then under settings here, there's another tab instead of network. There's a utilities tab, and if you click on that, you can go to ShowLink power mode, and it's usually on normal. You can bump it up to high. So if you are experiencing some range difficulties or challenges, try that first to see what happens. And then, of course, as we discussed, the usage of like LPDAs or other directional antennas like the AXT644 patch antennas and such would be a great thing to do. Get that antenna high and use like a kind of a shark fin, if you will.
Great.
Also, you can, I just, if people comes up, I usually access this screen and most of the other screens in the monitor because that's where I leave wireless Workbench most of the time when operating. So just that if people end up there, you can find it that way too.
That's a great point. Yeah, you can put it in the monitor tab, and the same thing applies. If you just right click on it, you should be able to go right to that properties of that device and bring you right to that page that Terence was talking about.
So a question came in about whether or not any of you have multiple transmitters linked to a single receiver channel.
Most definitely.
And how are you using that?
The application is, for example, and where ShowLink is really useful is with, say, an acoustic guitar application where you might have, while we do have more than one, for example, receiver for the principal, likewise, for a given receive channel, we've got more than one linked transmitter. And that way, the backline tech, he can swap out at will and keep it on that same guitar channel. The backline techs are very diligent and really good about shutting off transmitters. But the circumstances can happen, and it has on rare occasion happened where someone inadvertently left both transmitters on, which obviously is not so desirable for receiving a good signal. So it's easy enough to get the prompt in Workbench that says, oh, there's more than one linked transmitter on right now. And then you, of course, can mute one of them. That's a real saving grace of ShowLink, is being able to do that. Another thing that's cool about that, when you get that warning, you have the option to click in the interference window there, and it can, you can, clicking it, you can just automatically mute one or the other, or you can go to click a properties button from that interference window. And as Terence said, then it opens up properties for that particular receiver if you, for some reason, want to access it there. So that's yet another way to get to the properties is via the interference window.
That's a great point, Tike. Yeah, I have it up here right now. I have two transmitters that are on the same receiver channel, and they are, of course, on the same frequency, but they're not supposed to be on at the same time, but they are. And then when the interference dialog pops up, it gives you a warning, like Tike was saying, just multiple linked devices transmitting. Use property to figure out what's going on. And then if we go into the list, you can see the two different transmitters. In this case, one's a Tele and one's a Strat. And the guitar tech or whoever may have left both on, you can easily just go and say, RF mute 1, or better yet, use the activate, and that will activate the slot 1 or whatever slot you choose and mute all of the other ones in one click of the mouse. So rather than getting on the comms or running out across the stage and say, hey, those two transmitters are on, you can do that right from your Workbench instance.
Very useful feature.
Awesome.
We haven't gotten to try it yet. We have enough trouble hiding one body pack on people.
So I was curious, Terence, are you using the RF mute function? Like if the talent needs to have a private moment or go offset or anything like that? Has that become kind of standard practice now?
So we just have the faders down, and nobody is monitoring pre-fade. So we just have the boom mic can be open on set, but everybody else they just have their faders, all the faders down. So it's less it's less about their privacy, and it's more about like battery. And so when we know that they're going to go back to their trailer or something, we try and RF mute, and then I try and make sure that the monitor is open and that it's clicked to the receiver part of the monitor. And so there's the big red thing that says mute on it. And that's right there because, definitely sometimes they've come back and because if you click the receiver button, it'll go over to the other in the monitor. You can have it so it's showing you what the transmitter is doing, what the receiver is doing.
Yes.
And so if it's not on that, it doesn't show you that it's muted. And then sometimes you're like, I'm looking at them, but I don't see any RF. And it can be a little bit of a heart and throat moment. So I try and keep it to that one.
That's a great point. So if you are in Workbench, as Terence was saying, looking at the tab at the bottom, you either have a control for the receiver or you have a control if you click on the arrow here for the actual transmitter, and the device ID will show up. So you can mute both the receiver's output or mute it right from the source on the pack, but you do have to have ShowLink, of course, and make sure that your transmitter is here, and then you can turn it on or off just like that. Notice when I muted it, like all the RF goes down because it turned off the transmitter, saving that battery. And then
so I've been talking about RF mute. I guess I wasn't sure if I was clear, but yeah,
it's great. A lot of it, people don't when they go to the monitor tab, it's defaulted to the receiver. So to get to the RF mute, you do have to click that arrow over. Yeah, good point.
All right, let's go through some of these questions here. We did get a request to demo RF mute, which you did, which is awesome. Let's see. So a question came in about whether or not you can use the PA805 Z2 GLXD antenna with the AD610 or the AXT610. And you can. It's a 2.4 antenna. That's absolutely fine. It is a directional antenna. We also make a patch antenna. Does anybody have that up? I should pull that up in a browser. I'll throw the link in the chat. Oh, perfect. We have a patch antenna, which is also a directional antenna. That one's designed to actually clip on the side of the 610. I do not have that one with me. Let me see if I can get a picture pulled up. But yeah, absolutely. As long as it's tuned to 2.4 in the correct frequency range, you're good to go. So, yep. All right. Another question regarding the Q5X transmitters, actually. The question is if the Q5X transmitters are ShowLink compatible. They are not. Quantum uses their own protocol for this, so sorry. They do talk to Axient Digital, but they don't have the full ShowLink. You have to go through the Q5X interface in order to make those changes. There's someone super excited to have a location recorder. Thank you for being here, Terence. Like, finally.
Yeah, happy to be here. I mean, it's Shure is a new world for most of us. We've all been using other manufacturers for a long time, but it's so far so good. And I'm seeing a lot of my cohort also switching.
So how was that transition for you? Was the system easy to get into since you're sort of newest to Shure?
Yeah, it was pretty easy to get into. There's a lot of good support material. I've spent a bunch of time on the YouTube watching all those trainings, and the manuals are also comprehensive and pretty easy to understand. And I'm very grateful for it, because the first thing that we switched systems because most location sound people, we max out at 8 channels. For a long time, our recorders didn't really do much more than that, and we didn't need it because there aren't that many people talking in a scene usually. But for West Side Story, we would have 20-something people singing, and we'd have to have all of it. So we needed something that would be able to manage it, and so we built the rig, and then we're on set And the first time we got to try it was on set on a Spielberg movie. So the pressure was on, and it all just worked.
Awesome.
Terence, could I ask you a question?
Sure.
What, do you ever operate in high density mode, or do you usually operate normal? What's your typical situation?
We haven't had to switch to high density. We, like most days, we, don't get that many transmitters out. It's like 10. On West Side Story, it was like 10-ish, 15, depending on which gang you were with, But on most things, we would never get above 8 still. So we've never had to play with it.
Tike, have you? Since you bring it up?
Yeah. I'm going to have to, because we're going to add 12 more channels, and in challenging environments like Manhattan, Atlanta, some others that just, I sort of ran some trial files in Workbench, and for some specific ones, I'm most definitely going to have to do it, just because we're not indoors, so I don't have the benefit of the architecture to mitigate the noise floor. So as long as there's certain criteria, I think, that make high density mode more desirable, like really you get away with an awful lot more at normal power, or if for some reason you had to go higher. Obviously in high density mode, you have to be really sure that your antenna positions are good and that your proximity is good. Your range may not be as significant, but it's a really useful tool. If you need to get a lot more things on the air, you just need to be judicious about when and where you use it.
So a question came in for Terence. Somebody was asking about what your kind of overview of your signal flow is from the axient on the mobile rig. I mean, are you going to a recorder? Are you going to cameras? What's kind of the basic flow of where the signal's going?
So yeah, we go to a recorder, and then the recorder has time code, and then we give the camera time code, or on West Side Story was film, so the slate has a time code readout on it, and then they sync it later. Yeah, so it's all Dante. This was also our first experience with Dante. So well, it's not all Dante because the PSM 100 doesn't do Dante, but all of the other signal is on Dante. And so, yeah, that was another thing that was actually the thing we were like most worried about, having been analog, and the mixer, Todd Maitland, he has been using a Cooper mixer that's at least as old as I am. And, so it was a big shift to go fully digital, and we were all a little suspicious of it. And that was also pretty seamless.
So what was the reasoning for going Dante or making the jump?
The track load. So, to running 24 XLR in the back of something that sometimes you have to pick up. I mean, it's a big cart. It's heavy anyway, but on West Side, we had to go down like what is the equivalent of like maybe 5 or 6 stories to get into a subway station. And then you have to carry it back up. So every pound of XLR cable you can get rid of. Yeah, so it was just the track count. And then we had to, so we are going into a Sound Devices 970 that records 64, and then we have 2 of them just in case something happens.
Sweet.
All right. Quick question about HD mode. Does HD mode increase the latency and lower the power? What are the disadvantages? Mainly, it depends on what system you're using. If you're using Axient Digital, which is mostly what we're talking about with ShowLink, the latency does increase. Axient Digital is 2 milliseconds latency end to end. If you're running in HD mode, it's 2.9 milliseconds. If you're using ULXD, it's 2.9 regardless of whether or not you're in HD mode or not. and then the power drops. With Axient Digital, it drops to 2 milliwatts. With ULXD, it's 1. There are no other disadvantages besides being cautious about range. Keep in mind you're running at a lower power. It will not change the sound quality. That was a big one for us, and why why we were really careful about this. So that's the trade-off with the HD mode. So you have to be a little bit more cognizant about where your noise floor is and where your antenna setup is for that.
So speaking of latency, Jen, a question for Tike is, how do you deal with the latency between different digital and analog devices? I think you have a hybrid there, so maybe you can discuss a little bit. Is that an issue for you? Or are you using delay or anything to compensate for that latency?
Boy, that's a big discussion. I guess the gist of it is, in terms of my hardware, latency isn't really an issue. For example, the inners as such, the 1000s, there's really no latency associated with that. So it's everything sort of in front of the console. We are ingesting the signal as an analog signal, so there's the AD latency associated with that, and then of course leaving the console. But we're able to stay fairly successfully below the threshold we'd like. Typically, it's very common, I think, for monitor engineers to intentionally not engage things like delay compensation, because if you're someone who uses a lot of plugins, then this sort of gets off topic. The danger and where it can create a lot of latency is actually within the console itself. I, by nature, am operationally a less is more kind of person. Despite what you see, I try to keep things simple. Sort of what Terence and Jimmy have both said too. The goal isn't to make things complicated. The goal is to make things functional for our client with the minimum amount of expense and complexity, because complexity leads to failures, or at least it increases the probability of failures. So my latency mitigation is really on the side of how I operate the console, but certainly making judicious choice about how you take signals in and get them out. And you have to make choices about, what are the hardware limitations too. I don't know if that answered the question.
So it sounds like you're basically just trying to minimize latency, keep it simple, use judicious use of plugins and other things that add latency to the chain, and just be aware of it so you don't get phasing issues and other things, right?
Absolutely. Certainly slowing down. The issue, of course, is not that you're going to probably hear a delay, but rather you're going to hear comb filtering. And that can create its own set of problems for people. So it is the kind of thing that, for example, those 12 systems I talked about adding will probably run in high density mode, but for what they are doing, that additional 0.9 milliseconds is inconsequential to me. It's not going to affect what the performers are hearing in a way that will negatively impact them. So it's really about knowing what that would be very relevant, possibly, if you had enough other sources of latency on, say, a lead vocal. It's just not the case with this application for me.
Well, that's very insightful. Are you measuring the latency at all, or is it just kind of like you're just trying to keep it low and using your ears?
In the shop, I can. I don't carry around something like an audio precision analyzer, so it's just not very practical when you're out traveling and doing a show. So it's usually an evaluation that you can make in the shop. But the other thing is, too, manufacturers always have the information about what latency is incurred for a given piece of gear, depending on how you're using it. So if nothing else, you can just do the math, and that's a good way to do it, too.
Cool. Thanks for that.
Curious if anybody's used Quadversity at all. I haven't had the opportunity to try it out.
I almost tried and then I didn't.
we're like since we're not doing West Side, we actually took. It's been so long, I don't remember. It's been 2 months since I've looked at the cart. Well, either we took 2 or 3 of the racks out. I think we took 2 of the racks out. And so there's now, we just don't have the transmitter load. And there's part of me that's like curious of, if we wanted to, we could do it. And I'm interested. I'm curious.
Cool. You have to let us know if you do implement that.
Yeah.
I'm curious as well for your application. I don't think we've had any cart folks jump into Quadversity yet. It's mostly been stadiums and tours so far.
I'll say that indeed I do have 2A and 2B antennae. It would be great to run actually Quadversity instead, A, B, C, D. The thing is that I've got some legacy systems that are only diverse. And so it really wasn't going to offer a whole lot of benefit to us to run Quadversity without adding a lot more gear, and the performance has been adequate. It's amazing how much ability you have to improve performance, right? If you have an ADX-FD transmitter, you can have 2 transmitters, and you could run that thing in Quadversity, and you can have interference avoidance, and you can also, there's so many ways that you can reduce the probability of an RF failure. It's cool, but it may not be necessary to engage in all those measures. I think if you practice a lot of other best practices about RF, you don't need to do all of those, and sometimes it's just more desirable to do that than to tell a client, yeah, we need to spend this much money on this much gear, not because we really need it, but because I just thought it was cool. I don't think that's very good stewardship for your client.
I mean, that's part of why we didn't end up doing it, and we just took the racks that we weren't using out. But I do think it's cool, and I'm curious.
That's because it is cool.
Yeah.
Hey guys,
I mean,
we
speaking of which, I'm going you mentioned Quadversity and frequency diversity. I mean, they're pretty similar in the way they operate as far as using multiple channels or multiple radios. So like Quadversity, for one channel, you're using 4 distinct radios on the receiver to catch at A, B, C, and D. Where you're almost doing the same thing with frequency diversity because you're transmitting on 2 different frequencies to 2 different radios, so you still have 4 radios of redundancy to keep everything up and floating. It's just, I guess, how much redundancy is enough is the question. If it's already that good, then do you need more? Sometimes we see a lot of touring acts, so maybe they'll just put Quadversity on the main principal or the talent, and then the rest of the band will get regular diversity and things of that nature. So it opens up a bunch of questions for sure.
Yeah, the reason I said I almost tried was that the show started with the larger RF count, and then as the show progressed, we, it kind of scaled down into smaller version, and then I was thinking of putting Criss's pack, because if you do the Quadversity, then you lose the channel count on that 84Q. So now I actually have a room to make it as a Quadversity, but in order to do that, then I had to redesign the rack, and then that means that I had to redesign the show file. So after all that, I'm like, so that's where I was, and I'm like, you know what, the show is good, show's settled, but I thought it was such a great feature to have that. So
awesome. We have gone through an hour and a bit past, and I'm hoping our guests are willing to stick around. We have a ton of good questions left. Has somebody got some pressing things to do during quarantine? Are you guys good with answering a couple more questions that have popped in here?
I have another meeting in say 7 minutes, but
okay.
All right.
I'll see if I can weed out some specific questions for Terence here before we get out of here. There was one interesting question earlier that came in, and it's question is, I recall hearing Shure Marketing say it's okay to refreak using ShowLink mid-note while someone's singing. Have you guys ever done this? And anybody talk about the time it takes to do this if you do it manually versus automatic?
I know I know I have looked at the event log, and I know that it has changed it. It has refreaked the transmitter, and I haven't noticed it. Now, I don't, there's a million variables, and it could have been while someone wasn't talking, and the fader was down. So I don't, I just don't know when it would have happened. I've never I've never refreaked it while someone was talking. So,
yeah, it's a really good question, because there's kind of two ways that this system works, and the way you're talking about is kind of automatic, where there's a destructive interference event that comes in play, and then the 600 will send out a new frequency, and we estimate that's between about 80 to 90 milliseconds. So it is audible to a degree if it's happening during spoken word or during a note that someone's holding. But the alternative to this is if you were to make that change manually, if you were to see something coming into your space and catch it ahead of time, or you wanted to make a change, there's some cool stuff that goes on in the background where we kind of time align the packets when you hit make a change, and it's looking at those packets and it's making a change in a much quicker pace than it would in that automatic scenario where it's virtually inaudible if you were to do it manually. So that's a really good question. If you find something ahead of time, almost before the 600 does, which I know is difficult, it's pretty quick, but if you make a change intentionally from Workbench, there's a much shorter window of time it takes. I don't know if we've measured it, but I haven't been able to hear it when I manually make a change versus allowing the system to handle a destructive interference event. So that's a great question.
And then keep in mind, depending on which way you're doing it, with the body packs, Terence is using it's one pack, one transmitter per performer, right? I think Jimmy has a frequency diversity handheld for Criss, right? So, yeah, so awesome. In that case, you have two frequencies going all the time. So even if you do have to refreak one of those, it'll fall over to the audio from the other one, so there is zero interruption. If you're running.
I have changed the frequency middle of the show, just not while he was talking, and then, and it was pretty fluent, so it wasn't a big problem for me.
I'd also like to add that, the engineers explained to me that they've gone through great lengths to make sure that it will absolutely never, ever get out of sync, like having the receiver change without the transmitter changing, which of course would be disastrous. And kind of the behind the scenes thing is that the transmitter and the receiver kind of have a, hey, we're going to jump off the cliff in 1, 2, 3, go. And they wait till a certain clock cycle, and then they both jump off the cliff together. And they're absolutely sure that that's going to happen in case, something communication broke halfway through. So never ever will they get out of sync, or are you worried about one changing without the other? That question comes up sometimes.
Yeah, and there's an interesting question. We were just talking about the frequency diversity handheld and quadversity a minute ago, and it's, can you use quadversity and frequency diversity at the same time? And the answer is yes. You would essentially be dedicating an entire quad receiver to one hand mic at that point, which is, the end all be all of reliability. So yeah, you dedicate all 8 radios at that point to one hand mic for ultimate RF robustness. Let's see.
So
yeah, you got that question, Jen? There you go.
So a question came in about so when you were comparing mic systems, how did you arrive at using an Allen and Heath mixer, and what the Shure mic system set it apart from the competition sonically from a mixer choice?
So the mixer Todd, he was the one who made that evaluation, and he listened to the microphones that we have and that I'm using right now. Is a 416, a Sennheiser 416, and listened to those and a couple of lavs hardlined, and then then the transmitters, and it was the cleanest signal, that sounded the most like the analog way that we know. And the Allen and Heath, Todd looked at a couple different ones, a Yamaha board, and then the Allen and Heath. I'm a little less familiar with what it was that exactly decided for us to go to the Allen Heath, but we also had form factor concerns where it had to fit in the cart in a certain way. But I've been super happy with the Allen and Heath, and we are using, since we've gone digital and we've started using Allen and Heath and Shure, we're using tools that really were developed for live things, live shows, and they do a whole bunch that we don't need. I'm never going to put an effect on anything. And we deliver everything clean. We might put EQ on the mix track that people will listen to afterwards, but we deliver a version of everything on the ISO tracks that's totally clean. So being able to run all that through without anything, but there are so many features on these things that I'm never going to use because they don't really apply to me, or I just haven't figured out what they do yet.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think we should probably let Terence go because he has another engagement. Terence, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
We'll
Terence,
talk to you again soon.
Yeah,
cool.
Talk soon.
Have a good weekend, Terence.
Have a good weekend.
Stay safe, everybody.
Thanks, Terence.
Jimmy, Tike, you got some room for a few more questions before we...
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
Awesome. This one's come in, I think, a few times now, and the question is, can you register a single transmitter to multiple ShowLink APs? And yeah, it kind of works as almost like a mesh network. So if you connect multiple ShowLinks to your network, they will do seamless transitions based on zoning and transmitter count to basically seamlessly hand off themselves between APs.
So you'll see it on one, like if you have multiple access points in Wireless Workbench. So you noticed when we showed things with Workbench, you saw that Ben's access point, right? So if you have multiples, you would see multiples too. Okay, so that's important with naming them. And when you go to that particular access point, you will see your transmitter name there. And then when it hands off to a different access point, you'll see your transmitter actually move. So it's not actually attaching to both access points at the same time. It gets handoff one-to-one.
Awesome. Let's see. Answered that one. Here's a good question. How far can the ShowLink be from the receivers, and are there power issues? And can you externally power a ShowLink? That answer is yes. It runs off of standard PoE if you need it to, and most of the AD receivers come with a PoE output port. I'm not sure what the rated distance on that is if you're using a shielded Cat5. That's going to be
100 meters, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's 100 meters, so it's class 1 PoE, so it follows all the standard networking protocols for that.
And if you're going further than that, you can. We do sell an external power supply, or if you don't have PoE for some reason and you want to run it through a house network or something that doesn't have a PoE passing point, you can do that and then externally power it with the power supply.
Speaking of which, if you are trying to get PoE, it's great if it's in your switch or you're using a PoE injector. If you're using, you can also plug it into the Axient digital receiver. I think most of our users do that because the rack gear itself does deliver class 1 PoE.
When I first received it, I didn't know the unit because it just came out. So I see a PoE, but I also see the external power input. So I'm looking whole packaging, why I don't have a power supply. And then send you email, it's like, it's PoE. So
plug it in. Yeah.
So it actually has not failed. We on our show, on Residency show in Vegas, we don't really power cycle unless we're going into the dark weeks. And so most of the system is on like 24/7. and it's been solid. So I actually have a 2 PoE network switcher, one at the rack on the offsite, and then one at the front of house, and it's been powered from the front of house PoE network switcher, and then it's been fine.
Awesome. This just popped into my head as something we haven't covered yet, but I feel like it's kind of a cool thing that the access point's designed for a standard Shure mic clip to pop into the side of it. So if you have a standard mic clip, you can clip that to the side of the ShowLink, and then you can use any of those threaded mounts you have for mounting mic stands, etc. Look at this. Jen's gonna demonstrate. Boom, clips right in there on the side. A+ engineers. As a question just came through, does the system provide a warning if a transmitter loses ShowLink completely?
Yes, it sure does. You can, in Workbench, they'll give you a low ShowLink warning, and you can turn this on or off if it's bothersome. But as you go out of range, it will give you a warning box saying, "Hey, low ShowLink on channel whatever," and let you know descriptively so you can take action. Again, if you lose ShowLink, it's not the end of the world. The audio transmission is separate from that, so it's still going. But for that moment when you're out of ShowLink range, you do lose control over that transmitter.
There's also multiple parameters in Workbench that kind of show you constantly a different meter for your ShowLink reception quality. It's in Timeline. You can do ShowLink tests from the transmitters themselves. So if you go into the utility menu and you're walking your venue, you can open utilities on a transmitter and look at your ShowLink quality, and that will give you that from both sides. So there's quite a few ways to measure your ShowLink transmission quality in Workbench and on the transmitters.
And if you're monitoring on the rack, while it doesn't give you a pop-up warning the way Workbench does, there is a special meter that is ShowLink specific. It looks a lot like the bars you would see on your mobile phone. So you'll see basically those bars fill in roughly the same way, and then eventually disappear when you've lost your ShowLink connectivity on the receiver itself.
During the show, I have Criss's body pack mic that has all the parameters with the RF, and then ShowLink that is always on the computer to make sure that it's solid, see what is fluctuating.
All right, I think we're going to do 2 more questions. Gosh, we still have like a good pile here.
Came in earlier, but is the feature only available on Axient Digital, or is it available with ULXD or QLXD? It is only an Axient Digital feature.
So I'm going to jump this one, even though this is we don't have it, because I think it's good to know. Is there a way to set up RF mute presets for the transmitters? And that is not something that is in Workbench at this time. I think, this is something that we can definitely pass along to the team, though.
Jen, just for clarity, can you elaborate on that? Like why you would want to use that and what situation?
Yeah, so the question came in with, say you have an opener or a headliner that need to share frequencies, then you can quickly mute and unmute the RF on the necessary transmitters. So with the preset, if you have multiple receivers, that would be pretty slick. Otherwise, you're basically doing the multi-receiver the way Tike is using it for the guitars. Yep. Where you have that's a quicker switch. But as far as more of a global preset to turn things on and off, that is not in Wireless Workbench.
Like a group kind of grouping, and you just like a console has. Yeah, that makes sense.
I have one last question. This is probably actually it could be for either of you. Coverage of ShowLink down a catwalk. Any tips on that?
Never brought the microphone up to the catwalk, so but the catwalk is actually closer to front house than stage, so I don't think it's going to be a problem. Depends on how high the catwalk is. I mean, as a Tike on a stadium, it might be a completely different, story for spot up or, but on regular 15 to 1800 seating theater, I don't see any problem.
Certainly line of sight is important, particularly for the higher frequency associated with the 2.4 component. So I haven't had any problems, but I always am diligent about knowing, oh, when people get here, people's bodies make great barriers to any electromagnetic signals. So always sort of keep that in mind.
All right. Perfect. Any other closing tips and tricks for the people tuning in? We still have over 100 people listening to the two of you.
Yeah, we do.
One thing I was thinking as Jen approached me about this webinar is the advantage is so clear that you can, the control of the transmitter, the wireless Workbench is always able to control the receiving end, but especially when you have a, talent that wears a body pack and then this has a limited access and they're able to change whatever the parameter is, it's such a great tool. And then I was thinking about what is the disadvantage of the ShowLink system. And there's not that many, but one of them is you have to have an ADX system, axient digital system. And also you have to have a wireless Workbench, to fluently use it. So sometimes I do a one-off gigs into the nightclub or, corporate event. And sometimes I don't have access to the computer. I have axient digital, but I don't have access to the computer. And having a 610 won't do me any good because I can't really access to it. So that was only downside that I was thinking of, that that make sure that your system is complete than going with the gears and not able to properly functioning it.
The ecosystem.
The ecosystem.
That's right.
Yeah. So you can get to a lot of that stuff in the receiver, but it definitely means you have to dig in some menus. So it's not all in front of you the way wireless Workbench is, which is definitely an advantage to having the full computer suite. Tike, anything to add before we close this out?
I agree with Jimmy. The access, especially on your principal, where you don't have access, that's really great. I can think of a couple situations where we were in one-off applications. Time was short. We didn't know how our antenna coverage would be. I had trouble. There were two very long runways, and we didn't even have time for a walk test. It was set it up and go. And he got out to the ends, and it was spotty, just because my receive antenna positions weren't great. And it was so great just to be able to go over to Workbench and pop up the power on that transmitter. And I didn't keep it up there. I as soon as he got back closer to the stage where my receive antennas were, it was fairly easy to put him back on normal power. But for those, few seconds that he was out there at the end of the stage, that was a lifesaver. And he never knew anything happened. It didn't matter. And I'm sure Jimmy has the same with Criss. It's like, it's a good day when
Yes.
you have a problem and he doesn't know it.
Yeah, that's our job.
Absolutely. It's a great story.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you both for joining us, Jimmy and Tike. This was a really great discussion. We really appreciate the time. I think the audience definitely did too. And just a couple notes for those tuning in. We still have on Tuesdays, every first and third Tuesdays, an open forum, the Shure Tech Talk. Ben, Jason, and I are available. You can ask any question that you want. So totally open forum, which is super fun. And then next Friday, we're doing mic capsule selection. So how to choose that capsule for your vocalist, what goes into the thought process. We have 5 panelists from the music touring industry. It's going to be, I'm sure everybody's going to be fired up because that's always one of those topics. So do please join us next week for the mic capsule discussion. So thank you again. Thanks everybody for was joining in. Thank you, Tike. Thank you, Jimmy. And have a wonderful long weekend.
You
Take care,
too.
everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.